Sir, you need to move along. This is a restricted area. Sergeant First Class Danny Martinez stepped in front of the elderly homeless man who had been shuffling along the perimeter of Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, his voice carrying the professional authority of someone who dealt with dozens of similar situations every week. The man was thin, maybe 5'7", with graying hair that stuck out from under a worn knit cap, and clothes that looked like they'd been assembled from various donation bins over the course of months. He carried a weathered backpack that probably contained everything he owned, and his weathered hands showed the kind of wear that came from years of hard living. "I'm not causing any trouble, son," the old man replied quietly, his voice hoarse but steady. "Just looking for a warm place to sit for a few minutes." Martinez studied the homeless veteran because, despite his appearance, something about the man's bearing suggested military background with a mixture of sympathy and standard protocol awareness. Walter Reed attracted its share of homeless veterans drawn to the medical facility by proximity to services they couldn't access and memories of when they had belonged to something larger than themselves. "Sir, I understand, but this is the main entrance to a military hospital. Family members of patients are coming and going, VIP visits, official ceremonies. Your presence here is inappropriate." The homeless man, Marcus Washington, though Martinez hadn't bothered to ask his name, nodded with the resignation of someone who had learned to expect rejection from most interactions with authority. "I understand, Sergeant. I used to work in places like this. I know how it is." "You worked in military hospitals?" "Long time ago, son. Different life." Martinez felt his attitude shift slightly. Even homeless, and obviously struggling, the man was clearly a veteran who had served his country. That deserved basic respect, even if it couldn't override security protocols. "What did you do in the military?" Marcus hesitated, and Martinez could see him calculating what to reveal and what to keep private. "Medic. Army. 24 years. Active duty." Martinez was impressed despite himself. 24 years suggested career military rather than single enlistment, and medics were respected throughout the military community. "When did you serve?" 1,975 to 1,999. 3. Combat deployments. Somalia, Bosnia, early Afghanistan operations. Martinez felt a flicker of genuine interest. Those were significant conflicts, and an Army medic with 3 combat tours had probably seen more trauma and saved more lives than most people could imagine. "What was your MUS?" 68W. Combat medic. "But I also did trauma surgery training. Advanced life support. Battlefield medicine." The credentials were impressive, but Martinez still had a job to do. "Look, I respect your service, but I can't let you loiter around the hospital entrance. There are veteran services downtown, shelters that can help. I've tried the shelters, son. They're full, or they have waiting lists, or they have rules I can't follow." Martinez was about to respond when their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a black sedan with official government plates. This was clearly a VIP visit, which meant Martinez needed to focus on his security duties rather than social work with homeless veterans. "Sir, I really need you to move along now. We have an official ceremony starting in a few minutes." Marcus Washington gathered his backpack and began shuffling toward the street. But something made him pause and look back at the group of military officers emerging from the sedan. The lead figure was Colonel Patricia Hayes, a 8-year-old career officer with the kind of presence that commanded respect in any room. She was accompanied by her staff and several other senior officers who were clearly here for some kind of formal military function. Marcus recognized the signs immediately: the purposeful movement, the sharp uniforms, the air of importance that surrounded high-ranking military personnel conducting official business. He had spent 24 years working around officers like these, providing medical support for their operations and caring for their soldiers. But as Marcus watched from his position near the street, he noticed something that made his medical training kick in automatically. Colonel Hayes was walking with a slight limp, favoring her left leg. Her color was off pale with a grayish undertone that suggested cardiovascular stress. Most tellingly, she was unconsciously rubbing her left arm, a gesture that Marcus had seen thousands of times in trauma situations. "She's having a heart attack," Marcus said quietly to himself, his voice carrying the certainty of someone who had diagnosed similar conditions under combat conditions for 2 decades. Martinez was busy coordinating with other security personnel, ensuring that the VIP group could enter the hospital without disruption. He didn't hear Marcus's observation, and even if he had, he probably wouldn't have taken it seriously. The group of officers was halfway to the hospital entrance when Colonel Hayes suddenly stopped walking. She swayed slightly, her hand pressing against her chest, her breathing becoming labored. "Ma'am, are you all right?" asked Major Johnson, her aide-de-camp, but his voice carried concern rather than medical knowledge. Colonel Hayes tried to respond, but instead of words, she made a small gasping sound and collapsed to the pavement. The reaction from her staff was immediate but uncoordinated. Officers began shouting for help, reaching for cell phones, creating the kind of well-intentioned chaos that often accompanied medical emergencies when trained medical personnel weren't immediately available. "Someone call 911. Get a doctor." "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Marcus Washington watched the scene unfold for perhaps 3 seconds, long enough to assess the situation with the kind of clinical detachment that had kept him effective during hundreds of battlefield medical emergencies. Then he dropped his backpack and ran toward the collapsed officer. "Everyone step back." Marcus's voice carried across the chaos with unmistakable authority. "Give her space. I need room to work." Martinez looked up in amazement as the homeless man he had just been trying to remove from the area took command of a medical emergency involving one of the most senior officers at Walter Reed. "Sir." "You can't." "Sergeant." "I'm a medic," Marcus interrupted, already kneeling beside Colonel Hayes and beginning the kind of rapid assessment that 24 years of emergency medicine had made automatic. "This woman is having a myocardial infarction. She needs immediate intervention." The authority in Marcus's voice, combined with the obvious medical knowledge he was displaying, made Martinez step back, despite his confusion about protocol. Marcus placed 2 fingers against Colonel Hayes's neck, checking for a pulse while simultaneously observing her breathing, skin color, and level of consciousness. Pulse is thready and rapid. Respirations are shallow. She's conscious but not responsive to verbal stimuli, Marcus announced, his voice carrying clearly to the gathered officers. "Major, I need you to call the emergency room and tell them we have a female, approximately 48 years old, presenting with acute MI symptoms. Tell them to prep for immediate cardiac intervention." Major Johnson was staring at Marcus with obvious confusion. "Sir, who are you?" "I'm someone who can save her life if you do what I'm telling you right now," Marcus replied, his attention focused on Colonel Hayes rather than the politics of the situation. Colonel Hayes was now completely unconscious, her breathing becoming more irregular. Marcus placed his hands in position for CPR, but paused to make one more assessment. "She's going into cardiac arrest," he announced. "I'm starting compressions." What happened next was a textbook demonstration of advanced cardiac life support performed under field conditions. Marcus began chest compressions with the precise rhythm and depth that military medics learned through constant training and real-world application. 1, 2, 3, 4. Marcus counted, his compressions steady and effective. "Someone needs to get me an AED, if there's one available. And I need someone to maintain her airway." Martinez found himself following Marcus's instructions, despite having no idea who this homeless man was, or what authority he had to take charge of a medical emergency involving a senior officer. "There's an AED in the security office," Martinez called out. "Get it, now." While Martinez ran for the defibrillator, Marcus continued CPR with mechanical precision. His technique was flawless, the kind of skill that could only be developed through extensive training and repeated real-world application. "Sir," Major Johnson said, "are you a doctor?" "Combat medic, Army, 24 years." Marcus replied, without pausing his compressions. "I've done this before." The understatement was delivered with the kind of calm professionalism that suggested Marcus had indeed done this before, under conditions that were probably much more challenging than a hospital parking lot. Martinez returned with the AED, and Marcus immediately began applying the electrode pads with movements that suggested extensive familiarity with the equipment. "Everyone clear," Marcus announced, following the AED's voice prompts. "Stand back." The defibrillator analyzed Colonel Hayes's heart rhythm and recommended a shock. Marcus delivered it according to protocol, then immediately resumed CPR. "Come on, Colonel," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of personal investment that suggested he took every patient's survival personally. "You've got people counting on you. Don't quit on me now." After 2 more minutes of CPR, Colonel Hayes suddenly gasped, and her eyes fluttered open. Her pulse became stronger, her breathing more regular. Her skin color improved dramatically. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle but professionally focused. "You're at Walter Reed. You've had a heart attack, but you're stable now." Colonel Hayes looked up at Marcus with confused recognition. Who are you?" "I'm Doc, ma'am. I'm a medic. You're going to be fine." The ambulance arrived within minutes, and as the EMTs took over Colonel Hayes's care, they found themselves working with someone who had already provided textbook advanced life support. "Sir, are you medical personnel?" asked the lead paramedic as they prepared to transport Colonel Hayes to the emergency room. "Former Army medic," Marcus replied, stepping back to let the professionals work. She was down for approximately 4 minutes. "I maintained compressions throughout. Delivered 1 shock from the AED. Pulse returned after the 2nd round of CPR." The paramedic was clearly impressed by Marcus's clinical report. "Outstanding work. You probably saved her life." As the ambulance pulled away, Marcus found himself surrounded by the group of military officers who had witnessed the entire emergency. Their expressions ranged from amazement to confusion to something approaching awe. "Sir," Major Johnson said formally, "I don't know how to thank you. Colonel Hayes is. She's very important to a lot of people." Marcus was gathering his backpack, clearly preparing to disappear back into the anonymity of homelessness. "No thanks necessary, Major. Just doing what I was trained to do." "But who are you?" Martinez asked. "I mean, really?" Marcus hesitated, and the officers could see him calculating what to reveal about himself. "Like I said, Sergeant, former Army medic, Marcus Washington. Most people called me Doc." The name didn't immediately register with anyone present, but Martinez was beginning to understand that there was more to this homeless veteran than his appearance suggested. "Doc Washington, where did you serve?" "Different places over the years. Somalia, Bosnia, Afghanistan, wherever the Army needed medics." Major Johnson was studying Marcus with new interest. "Sir, what unit were you with in Afghanistan?" "Different units, special operations mostly. 75th Rangers, some Delta Force medical support." The words hit the gathered officers like electricity. Special operations medics were legendary in military circles, warriors who provided advanced medical care under the most extreme combat conditions. "You were a special ops medic?" Martinez asked. "For most of my career, yes." Major Johnson felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "Doc Washington. Were you Marcus Washington? The Marcus Washington?" Marcus's expression grew uncomfortable, as if he'd revealed more about his background than he'd intended. "Depends on what you've heard, Major. The medic who saved half a ranger company in Mogadishu. The guy who performed emergency surgery in a crashed helicopter while under enemy fire." Marcus was clearly reluctant to discuss what were obviously painful memories. That was a long time ago, Major. Sir, Martinez said with dawning understanding. You're a legend. I've heard stories about Doc Washington, my entire military career. The revelation transformed the dynamic completely. These officers realized they were talking to someone whose medical skills and combat experience were the stuff of military folklore. Doc Washington, Major Johnson said with obvious respect. What are you doing here? Living on the streets? Marcus's weathered face showed pain that went deeper than physical hardship. Life got complicated after I retired. Major. Lost my wife to cancer 2 years ago. Medical bills bankrupted us even with insurance. Started drinking to deal with the guilt. The nightmares. Lost my job. Lost the house. Been on the streets about 18 months. The story was delivered without self-pity. Just the flat recounting of how even the most accomplished individuals could be systematically destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. But why didn't you get help from the VA? Someone with your record should have access to every benefit available. Marcus smiled bitterly. Major, I've been trying to navigate the VA system for 2 years. My disability claims are tied up in bureaucracy. My PTSD treatment got canceled due to funding issues. My housing applications keep disappearing into the system. Martinez realized they were looking at a systemic failure that had allowed one of the military's most decorated medics to fall through the cracks of veteran support services. Doc, that's going to change. Today. Sergeant? You just saved the life of Colonel Hayes. She's the deputy commander of military medical operations for the entire East Coast. If anyone has the authority and influence to fix your situation, it's her. 3 hours later, Marcus Washington found himself in a private room at Walter Reed, not as a patient, but as an honored guest. Colonel Hayes, now stable and recovering from her heart attack, had insisted on meeting the man who had saved her life. Doc Washington, Colonel Hayes said from her hospital bed, her voice still weak but determined. I understand. I owe you my life. Marcus was clearly uncomfortable with the attention. Ma'am, I just did what any medic would do. Any medic with 24 years of special operations experience and a Medal of Honor for combat medical service. The mention of the Medal of Honor surprised Marcus. Most people didn't know about that particular decoration, which had been awarded for classified operations that couldn't be publicly acknowledged. Ma'am, how do you know about that? Because I spent the last 3 hours having my staff research your service record. Doc Washington, you're a legend in military medical circles. What you accomplished in Somalia, Bosnia, and Afghanistan saved hundreds of American lives. Marcus looked uncomfortable with the praise. I was just doing my job, ma'am. Your job included performing emergency surgery in combat zones, training other medics in advanced trauma care, and developing battlefield medical protocols that are still used today. Colonel Hayes was studying Marcus with the kind of professional assessment that senior officers used when identifying exceptional personnel. Doc, I have a question for you, and I want an honest answer. Yes, ma'am. Are you still capable of practicing medicine? I mean, could you work in a medical environment again? Marcus considered the question seriously. Ma'am, I haven't practiced medicine in 2 years. I've been dealing with PTSD, alcohol dependency, homelessness. I'm not the medic I used to be. But you just saved my life using techniques that required split-second diagnosis and flawless execution. That suggests your medical skills are intact. Basic emergency medicine, maybe. But I'd need retraining, certification, psychological evaluation, all of which can be arranged. Colonel Hayes interrupted. Doc, Walter Reed has a program for medical personnel who need rehabilitation and retraining. It's designed for people exactly like you experienced medical professionals who need help getting back into practice. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months, hope mixed with fear that it might be taken away. Ma'am, I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of responsibility again. Doc, you just proved that you're ready. When I collapsed, you didn't hesitate. Didn't doubt yourself. Didn't let your personal circumstances prevent you from doing what needed to be done. That's exactly the kind of medical professional we need. Over the following weeks, Marcus Washington began the process of rebuilding his medical career with the same methodical precision he had once applied to battlefield medicine. Psychological counseling addressed his PTSD and substance abuse issues. Medical retraining updated his skills with current protocols and equipment. Most importantly, his work with other veterans provided the sense of purpose that had been missing since his retirement. "Doc," said Specialist Rodriguez during one of Marcus's training sessions with young medics, "can you teach us about trauma surgery under fire? The stuff you did in Somalia?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering how to share knowledge that had been earned through experiences he hoped these young soldiers would never have to face. "The most important thing to understand," Marcus said finally, "is that battlefield medicine isn't about perfect conditions or ideal equipment. It's about making life and death decisions with limited resources while people are shooting at you. How do you handle the pressure? You focus on the patient in front of you. Everything else, the noise, the danger, your own fear becomes secondary to saving the life you're responsible for." "Is that what you were thinking when you saved Colonel Hayes?" Marcus smiled, remembering the moment when training had overridden circumstances. "I wasn't thinking about anything, except getting her heart beating again. That's what good medics do. They focus on what needs to be done, not on who they are or what people think of them." 6 months later, Staff Sergeant Marcus "Doc" Washington was formally reinstated as a medical instructor at Walter Reed. With full veteran benefits, base housing, and access to the kind of advanced medical training that would keep his skills current with modern military medicine, Colonel Hayes, now fully recovered from her heart attack, had become one of his strongest advocates and closest colleagues. "Doc," she said during one of their regular meetings, "I've been thinking about that day in the parking lot." "What about it, ma'am?" "You could have walked away. You were homeless, dismissed by security, ignored by everyone around. You had every reason to let someone else handle the emergency." Marcus shook his head. "Ma'am, that's not how medics think. When someone needs help, you help them. Everything else is secondary. Even when society has failed you? Even when the system has let you down?" Marcus looked out the window at Walter Reed's medical facilities, thinking about the young medics he was training and the lives that would be saved through the knowledge he was passing on. "Especially then, ma'am. Because that's when helping others reminds you that you still have value, still have something to contribute. That's when saving someone else's life helps save your own." The program that Marcus helped develop became a model for military medical facilities around the world. His methods, combining traditional battlefield medicine with modern trauma care and psychological support, produced some of the most effective combat medics in military history. But perhaps most importantly, Walter Reed established the Doc Washington Program, a comprehensive rehabilitation service for military medical personnel who had fallen through the cracks of veteran support systems. The program ensured that no other decorated medic would end up homeless and forgotten, carrying life-saving skills that the military desperately needed. On the first anniversary of Colonel Hayes' heart attack, the two of them stood in the same parking lot where Marcus had saved her life. This time, he was wearing the uniform of a military medical instructor. She was fully recovered and back to active duty, and both of them understood how much had changed in a single moment of crisis. "Doc," Colonel Hayes said, "I have something for you." She handed him a small wooden box. Inside was a military commendation specifically created to recognize his actions that day. Staff Sergeant Marcus Washington. Warrior, healer, lifesaver. "Ma'am, I was just doing my job." "No, Doc. You were doing much more than that. You were proving that warriors never truly retire. They just wait for the next opportunity to serve." Marcus looked at the commendation, then at the medical facility where he now worked every day, then at the young medics who were carrying on the tradition he had helped establish. You know what the most important part is, ma'am? What's that? I finally understand that saving lives isn't just a job, it's who I am. Circumstances can change. Situations can get desperate. But the calling to help others survives everything else. The homeless veteran who had been dismissed as irrelevant had become living proof that heroes don't disappear when they fall on hard times. They wait patiently for someone to need what they have to offer. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment of crisis to remind everyone that the most valuable people are often the ones who look like they have nothing left to give. Doc Washington had saved more than Colonel Hayes's life that day. He had saved his own sense of purpose, his own identity, and his own understanding that service to others is the highest calling any warrior can answer, regardless of rank, circumstances, or the assumptions that others make about who deserves respect. The medic they never saw coming had reminded them all that healing is more than a profession. It's a commitment to preserving life that transcends uniform, status, and every barrier that society might construct between those who serve and those who are served.